Welcome! I am Dr. Benton, and this is the lecture on air masses. And this is getting into one of my favorite parts of the year, when we get to learn about weather. And air masses are large parts of the atmosphere, and the condition of those air masses is what we call weather. Remember? So, warm-up question, what do we call these large bodies of air that have about the same temperature and humidity throughout them? And here we see a ship that got stuck in the ice, so this polar bear wanders off, pushes the ship back into the water, and then waves, "Bye, friends." So that large body of air, we call that an air mass. Within this air mass, we have approximately uniform temperature. It's all about the same temperature. It's all about the same air pressure. And it's all about the same moisture content, the same humidity throughout. How it gets those properties is from the land under it. That's how most air gets its properties, right? When the land is hot, the air gets hot. When the land is cold, the air gets cold. Same thing with moisture. If it's over a body of water like the ocean, you would expect more evaporation. If it's over dry land, you would expect less evaporation, less humidity, less moisture. And so the way we name these things is actually based on the land that they come from, because that's what describes these properties of temperature and moisture. So if it's cold, we tend to call it a polar air mass. Polar because it's cold up in the poles, right? If it's warm, we call it tropical, because down in the tropics around the equator is where it's warm. And I think that makes sense to everybody. If it's wet, like coming from the ocean, we call it maritime. And maritime is a word that means from the sea, from the ocean. So maritime means from the sea, from the ocean. If it's from dry land, though, we call it continental, because the continents are what we call our dry land masses. And so we combine these words. Maritime polar means that it's wet and cold. Continental polar means that it's dry and cold. Continental tropical means that it's dry and warm. Maritime tropical meaning that it's wet and warm. So these are the big vocabulary words. If you just remember the difference between maritime and continental, you've got it made. If you just remember the differences between polar and tropical, you've got it made. It's that easy. So over the United States, these are the main air masses we see, these main four. There are other air masses elsewhere in the world. Don't worry about them. If it comes from the ocean, we call it maritime. If it comes from the land, we call it continental, and that tells us if it's wet or dry, humid or dry. If it's coming from the polar regions, we call it polar, and that means that it's cold. If it's coming from the tropical regions, that means it's warm. And so just by knowing where this air is coming from, we automatically know something about the weather in it. We can automatically predict the weather inside it. Inside this cold air mass, we know that it's a high pressure system, and like we learned about yesterday, when the air rises, high pressure is when it sinks. It's cold, so it sinks, and that's what makes the clouds disappear. So we have drier, less cloudy, sunny, more clear air. Down here, though, where it's low pressure, it's warm, it's low pressure, all of that humidity is rising into the air, very cloudy, lots of storms from this maritime tropical air masses. So let's do some practice. First, I'm going to give you the questions here through Edpuzzle, and first I want you to tell me about what is number 1. What is this number 1 called? And then let's compare that to number 2. Here, what is number 2 called? And then let's come down and compare that to number 4. What is number 4 called? And then let's look at number 5. What is number 5 called? Great! So this is all you really need to know about air masses. Tomorrow we're going to learn even more about the weather. Because we've already said in the middle of the air mass, high pressure, cold, that water vapor descends, the clouds disappear, it becomes clear, sunny. And so this is with cold air masses, and this is in the middle of the air mass. Same thing here, in the middle of the warm air mass, we have low pressure. That low pressure air rises, so when it's warm, we tend to have more rain clouds. But where the real weather events occur and where we really see them moving at is where they meet. The borders of these air masses where they meet are called weather fronts. And weather fronts are really what meteorologists track on weather reports. And we're going to learn more about those fronts tomorrow. For today, I've got 3 short little videos I want to show you about air masses. And again, this is just knowing how they're named, what's inside them, and the kind of weather they bring. Pretty basic, pretty simple. So let's take a look at these YouTube videos. Alright, this first meteorologist is from the Weather Channel, and he's going to talk to us about some of these different air masses.
Hey everybody, I'm meteorologist Ryan Davidson. Well, we talked about the jet stream in one of our previous clips and how it divides different types of air masses. Well, let's take a look at all the different types of air masses that we can have. There are lots of them. You've got continental Arctic, which are really cold air masses that happen over land. You've got your continental polar, which is a little bit warmer, but still really cold, but generally dry because it's over land. And then you've got your continental tropical, which is still over land, but slightly warmer. And the ones that happen over the oceans, well, that's your maritime polar, so your wet air masses that are cold, and then your maritime tropical ones, they're your wet air masses that are warmer, and they generally happen over the oceans. Now, they can move, and this is how they all break down. You've got your very cold and dry up by the poles. You're cold and dry, a little bit further to the south. You're warm and dry. So generally when you hear continental air masses, that means they're going to be dry. A maritime air mass, that happens over the maritimes, the oceans, bodies of water, and that means they will have more moisture. And so these different types of air masses, when they start swirling around on the Earth's surface, create frontal boundaries and different types of weather features.
Yay. Alright. This second video is from the Meteorological Office of the UK. Wonderful. So this video did a great job showing us how low pressure air rises and how high pressure air sinks. Pressures actually move the air in a circular motion because of the Coriolis effect. When the high pressure air sinks, though, it creates calm, sunny conditions. When the low pressure air rises, it creates these cloudy, rainy conditions. And so this is the last video. This is from the BBC, talking a little bit more about England's weather, the UK's weather specifically. But he talks about these 4 properties of air masses, and I think it's just funny. So let's check it out.
Our unique weather is all to do with our position on the planet. The whole of the United Kingdom just so happens to be slap bang under the place where 4 colossal air masses meet. Now, an air mass is an enormous lump of our atmosphere. At the surface, it's the same temperature and the same humidity over thousands of square miles. When different air masses meet, they fight for supremacy, and the one that wins dictates our weather. Ladies and gentlemen, let the battle commence. Imagine, if you will, that these guys are what the weather boffins call the polar air mass, invading our skies from the north, bringing freezing Arctic air, sending temperatures plummeting across the UK. But before you've had the chance to put the heating on, here comes the tropical air mass, blazing a trail from the south, delivering warm air from places such as North Africa and the Med. And when they clash, we get a weather front. Now, there are a lot of places in the world that sit under where the tropical air mass and the polar air mass meet. But the UK is extra special because it also sits between a large ocean, that's the Atlantic to the west, and a large landmass, that's Europe and Asia to the east. And that makes our weather even more chaotic and a bit more angry. The maritime air mass, these chaps in the blue t-shirts, suck up billions of litres of moisture from the Atlantic Ocean, then travels east to dump torrential rain on our barbecues. Finally, to the rescue comes the continental air mass, cruising across the dry land of Europe and Asia, ready to go to war with the cold, wet front, in a bid to give us a warm, sunny day. But that is not the whole story, because you've yet to meet the big daddy of British weather, the jet stream, and that can overpower all of those guys. It's a monumental wind that can fly across the sky at 250 miles an hour. Powerful and determined, if the jet stream heads north, it blocks the polar and maritime air masses. And it's party time for the tropical and continental air masses, now free to smother us in warmth and sunshine. Well, thanks to the jet stream, we enjoyed the hottest summer on record back in 2006. We had 18 weeks of uninterrupted sun. Even Northern Ireland and Scotland had a decent summer. But as you'd expect, it's not always good news. If the jet stream decides to head south, pushing back the warm, dry front, we're in for more familiar, wet and chilly conditions. And that, in a nutshell, is why we have our British weather. It's unpredictable, it's crazy, it's bonkers. But it's ours. And deep down, secretly, we love it.
Yeah, so the United States, specifically here in Georgia, we're in a similar situation as England because we are bordered. Let's look back. We are bordered by land from the west, water from the east. We're right at the border between the poles and the tropics. We're in the temperate region. So we constantly have competition of these four qualities: wet, dry, warm, and cold. And so inside the air mass, we said, when we have high pressure, cold air makes high pressure, so it sinks and dries out with very sunny. When we have a warm air mass, especially a moist air mass, and it rises, that low pressure rises, cools and condenses to make clouds and rain. So here's our ticket out the door today. What would you expect the weather to be like inside a maritime tropical air mass, and why? And I thought this was a good inspirational quote for today. You can't get mad at the weather because the weather's not about you. Apply this lesson to most other aspects of your life. So many people get angry at so many other people for so many different things that it's just not about you. Let people like things. Let people do things. You worry about you. Hopefully you enjoy this air mass presentation. Join us again tomorrow for more information on weather fronts. Thank you.